Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are glad to have Arjun Krishna Lal and Mwongera Mutiga here with us to continue our conversation about global youth culture. How do we talk about it and what's it going to look like? So we've talked a lot about the differences between people and generations, and we like to do that. We like to ask, how is the emerging generation different from the one that came before it? But some things don't change. What do you think the youngest generation has in common with, say, the greatest generation that fought World War II?
Okay, let me take that. Thanks for having us back, Holland. This is an amazing podcast. Really glad to be here. I think the youngest generation, and I'm thinking about my own first grader in my house. I think they live in very uncertain and very unprecedented time. COVID is one thing that has really changed the landscape for the world as we know it. But even before COVID, even without COVID, I think life is very uncertain. There's a lot of things that we don't really know. There's a lot of information that we don't have control over. We're living in a time of a lot of fake news. You'd think that the internet would democratize information and make it easier to get to the truth. The opposite is happening. We have a lot more fake news and a lot more propaganda happening at a micro level than ever before. So I think, my kids are living at a very uncertain and unprecedented time. I think the children are suffering the consequences of decisions made by other people. So, you could argue that COVID itself was a bad decision by somebody somewhere. But even just the whole information space and things around pollution and the environment and how we deal with wildlife, etc. These are all consequences of decisions that are made by other people. And I think in many cases, the World War generation, that's probably my granddad's generation, it was a similar thing. It's somebody who sat somewhere, a couple of people who decided, we're going to invade that country, and that led to consequences that everybody suffered. So I think that's part of it. And I think the younger generation is at the beginning of a new era. Because of the uncertainty, it heralds a new era, a new approach, a new phase. It's almost like what happens after a bushfire. There's a lot of destruction, but after that, then there is new life that's breathed into it. And I think that's where our children are. They're a place where the uncertainty is giving them much more opportunity and possibly hope for the future. So I think those are some of the similarities.
Thanks for sharing that. How would you respond, Arjun?
I'd say that I think I agree with what Mwongera said there with regards to uncertainty, and perhaps that's something that brings together the young people that are living right now and people that lived in those incredibly uncertain times during and before the Cold War, during the World War II, during World War One. But I think apart from that, what we have in common are like certain values and certain systems, for example, like family. And what I see is that even if our definitions, for example, of what family constitutes evolve, there are certain intangibles, the aspect of unconditional love, relationships, those kind of things that don't change. And I don't think that the generation gap is so great that people aren't able to understand these fundamental human things that kind of bring us together. So I think that's kind of where it's at. I think the superficial nature of, or maybe the externalities of the societal relationships and things that we see, those are evolving. The dynamics of those are evolving, but what they represent fundamentally isn't really changing. So it's the same people in different contexts. I'd say that's what fundamentally.
I love these answers, Holland.
There's some really good quotable stuff in here, isn't there?
Yeah. I'm hearing some metaphors being kicked in, and just beautiful. I love that idea. So as an educator, I would love to hear from both of you as we think about what do you think education is going to look like? What will need to change in this next generation? For instance, how are we going to educate students for a work environment that is totally unformed? It hasn't even, started. And Arjun, I'm going to start with you because you just created a business out of your bedroom. So tell us what we need to do for educating this next generation.
Education, I think it needs to focus on analysis, and it needs to focus on turning people into independent thinkers. I think the current systems that we have, especially in India, for example, right now, they place a lot of emphasis on rote learning and on memorizing sets of facts. I really wanted to be an Indian diplomat, and I wrote the exam, our civil service exam, 3 times. I spent 3 years of my life doing that. And there's over 1.5 million people each year who write that exam. And what you do is you spend an entire year memorizing all the minutiae in newspapers from the past 2 to 3 years, as well as the names of every international organization. And what I just thought when I did that at one point in time was, how on earth is this going to help me with assessing, a dynamic diplomatic breakdown? Like, how on earth is that going to help at all? And I think that perhaps applies not just to that very specific, example, like my personal example, but to the purpose of education in general. Like, I completely get what you said there about, work environment that doesn't even necessarily exist. We don't know where the future of work is going to be at in 10 years from now. Is it going to be completely virtual? Is it going to be something, even different from that? But we don't need to know that, is what I'm trying to say. We don't actually need to know what something is like if you're able to teach people to analyze, and if you're able to teach people to basically take data points and then make something useful out of that. That's the skill that we need to be teaching, because that is the skill that kind of generates the ability to do everything else. And when you just teach people to memorize facts, or when you teach people to, not apply what they learned in real life, you're not really preparing them for anything.
Well said. I'm going to sign you up for my school. You can be one of my teachers. How about you, Mwongera?
So I have an interesting experience with one of my kids when they were 2 years old. They had figured out how to take my phone, unlock it, go to the YouTube app, and find the videos that they like. At the time, they used to watch Peppa Pig, which they don't anymore for a number of reasons. But the point is that she was able to do that. This is a 2-year-old, can't even talk, but knows how to find what they need on the internet by themselves. And I was just thinking to myself, when I was 2 years old, I can't even imagine. The stuff that she's doing at 2 is stuff that I started doing in my late 30s. And so that's the nature of technology. That's what's happening in the world today. So I don't know what that's going to look like 10 years from now. I've got no idea. And I completely agree with Arjun on this. We do not know what life, what work, what society is going to look like 5, 10, 15 years from now. But, these kids are growing up and they need to get into that space. I think what we need to do, in addition to teaching them just some of the technical elements, some of the skills, like Arjun has said, I think we also need to give them a strong work ethic, that they need to understand the value of hard work. And people say hard work versus working smart. Yes, you can work smart. That's helpful, but you cannot avoid hard work, that you have to put in a certain level of effort. I think working smart does not excuse you from putting in effort, right? Fine, you'll do things a little easier than other people, but you do have to put in effort. And so the value of hard work and a strong work ethic, that you can show up, get stuff done, simple things around the house, you can get chores done, you're not thinking of ways to automate how to do dishes, and you can automate how to do dishes. By the end of the day, the dishes have to be done. So just teaching a strong work ethic, I think giving them resilience and adaptability. How do you deal with uncertainty? How do you deal with change? How do you deal with stress? How do you deal with things that are not working the way you want? At the end of the day, those values will work for them no matter what kind of work setting they get into. If your child is able to be resilient in the face of challenges, if they're able to adapt to change as it comes their way, that they're not just fixed on one way of doing things, but they're able to do things differently. I think those are values that would serve them well. And I think also the value of diligence, just doing work well. My dad keeps telling me this. He says, a job worth doing is worth doing well. I think that's a value that we need to teach our kids. If you're going to do something, do it properly. If you're going to, at some point, you're going to be developing stuff. You're going to be using programming and machine learning and all of that. But regardless of that, whatever you're going to do, you have to do it properly. You have to do it well. So teaching them excellence and diligence will allow them to use those skills, whatever skills they may need or whatever skills they may have at that point, to a better effect or to a better result. So I think teaching them values in addition to the skills is also a critical part of education.
Let's sign these guys up, put them in the State Department of Education.
Well, turning to a little bit of a darker topic, Mwongera, I know you have the program, the Papa Bear Initiative, helping men become fathers. And a topic that's dominating a lot of our cultural moment right now in the US is sexual assault. As someone who educates new fathers, how would you advise parents to empower the emerging generation to be neither victims nor perpetrators of assault?
Thanks for that, Holland. It's a dark issue. In this part of the world, we call it gender-based violence. And, people don't like the word violence, but that's exactly what it is. And we call it gender-based because it's largely based on gender, and it's overwhelmingly targeted towards women. Yes, gender-based violence happens towards men, but it's overwhelmingly about the women. And at its very core is an understanding or a negative understanding of gender stereotype. People will excuse bad behavior or violence or assault because to them, that person is not really human, is not really at my level. Somebody who is going to violently attack a woman will not do the same thing to a man because in his mind, that woman is weaker or is less of a person than he is, and therefore his actions are justified in his own twisted mind. And that's part of the problem. When we dehumanize these issues, then we allow ourselves to do things that are unthinkable. I think the issue of negative gender stereotypes are a big part of it. And it starts from a very young age. When you have kids who are told that, men are not supposed to do this, or boys are not supposed to cry, or it's only women who are supposed to do certain activities, certain chores, you're basically reinforcing in them the idea that you are different from that person and that person is inferior to you, that you cannot do those things. If you do them, that makes you less of a man. And therefore, the people who do them are less than you are. And in a way that kind of justifies and reinforces the idea that, you can do whatever you want with them. And that's wrong. I think what we need to teach our children is to value other members of society. We need to break down these gender stereotypes. We need to do away with the negative gender divide. The truth is, men and women are not the same. There's definite difference biologically, psychologically, in many other ways. But women are not less than we are. They're not less valuable or less important, or the work that they do is not less impactful than what men do. And that's the point we need to get at. We need to break down that issue. One of the ways to do that is to give uniform exposure to gender roles, right? One of the things that happens in this part of the world is that some boys are taught from a young age that boys don't go into the kitchen, okay? The kitchen is not a place for men. It's women who go to the kitchen to cook. And that's a very dangerous narrative because you're basically telling the guy that, anybody who cooks is basically inferior to you. That cooking is something that's done for you. And so the person who cooks is less than you are. And that's very dangerous. And so I think we need to expose our children to gender roles within the home in a healthy way, but let them know that this is not about boys versus girls. This is really about functionality and who is better suited from a biological or psychological perspective to do certain role. And not that any role is any less important or less valuable than the other. So I think what we need to do is we need to attack those gender structures and deal with them at the root and be comfortable with the discomfort that it will bring, because we're talking about undoing generations, centuries of culture and the way that people think. We have to undo it, because this is exactly how gender-based violence becomes entrenched. Our grandfathers, our fathers used to be so violent with their wives. There are places in Kenya today where a woman will say, I don't feel loved because my husband doesn't beat me up. I mean, how twisted is that? But it's happening. It's a true story. It's actually happening. And it's just the whole gender stereotype. When we break those negative gender stereotypes, then we'll have made a big step in dealing with gender-based violence, in my view.
I think that's a powerful answer. Yeah. Arjun, did you want to add anything to that, or is that?
I think that I'd prefer to just defer to Mwongera here, because this is something that as a young person, this is something that I think I would want to learn. What I can say is that when I grew up, I saw my dad sweeping the floor, cooking food, and my mom sometimes mowing the lawn and shoveling snow. And what Mwongera said about this idea that when you ingrain certain jobs are gender-based, certain roles are gender-based, I think what really struck me with what he said is that essentially tells people, that essentially tells men, in all honesty, that these things are done for you and not by you. And I think that's perhaps one of the more important things there, is that we have to make sure that young men in particular understand that they need to do things by themselves. And there aren't people out there that do things for you. That doesn't exist. That I think that needs to, responsibility is something that everybody needs to take. And that means every kind of job that you need to do to have a functioning household, that should be something that everybody's capable of doing. And I think it starts from there.
Both of you, well said. Those are tremendous answers to a very dark subject. And we're going to continue down this dark road just for a bit, and then we're going to flip the switch, hopefully. We've had some, and Arjun, you touched on it a little bit with some of the fake news. We've had everything from the US and Brazil, Hungary, India, Philippines. We've just seen this rise in right-wing nationalism, this authoritarianism, and just this kind of crumbling of democracy in some places. So, Arjun, I'm gonna toss this to you first. What's the role of young people in changing or reinforcing this trend?
I think that it's not so much a question of or, but it's a question of and, because they're doing both at the same time. Here in India, we've seen a certain degree of an erosion in certain democratic institutions over the past 6 years. We've also seen the rise of ethnic or religious-based violence, and we've seen we've seen certain kinds of things that are related inherently to the kind of governance that we have, but the complexity there is that the simple narrative is young people are going to save the day, and young people are going to information, know everything, and they have different sets of values. But the fact is India has, and it continues to have today, even if you look at statistics, we have among the most free and fair elections anywhere in the world, including the West. And that is very scary, because what that says is that a lot of the institutional backsliding we've seen, a lot of the things that are seen as okay, things like cal vigilantism, which is a whole absurd thing, but within the context of Indian politics is a real problem, are things that are happening because people are okay with that. And by people, I mean a huge section of young people, because so many of our voters, young people. And I've seen, both sides of this, because I have friends on both sides of the political spectrum, and they're people who are, very much in favor of, I'd say, like, there are people who are on like the very far left wing of things, and then there are people in the center, then there are people who are on the extreme right, and that there's a diversity of opinion there within young people itself. And it's not so much a cut and dry thing where it's like a generational gap and the old people want to reinforce authoritarian values and the young people want to fight against it. It's more about, again, information and how you analyze it. So when you have a certain I think Mwongera touched on this a bit ago, but like when you have a certain perspective and then there's so much information coming in, you just end up filtering things out so that you think about it from your own little perspective. And in any of the proliferation of fake news, and I mean just news in particular as well, is kind of something that reinforces this. Because if you look at the news sources that a person on the political right reads or accesses on social media, and the ones that perhaps a liberal person looks at, they're fundamentally different. There's literally zero overlap. And that's terrifying, because it says that there are multiple sources of quote unquote truth, and people are making their value judgments based on those things. And that's kind of where it's at. And I think that I'd have to say there are young people that are reinforcing these trends, and then there are also young people trying to make a change. But it's not an either or. It's both of these things happening at the same time.
Kind of, your statement reminds me of the character from Dr. Dolittle, the animal that was the push me, pull you. You're going both ways at the same time. How about you, Mwongera?
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree with Arjun on this. I'd also defer to him on this particular issue. I think he's probably closer to this issue than I am. I just want to say that we're seeing a lot of this happening on the African continent, sort of like a change. And I like the word you used, Arjun, that backsliding. We're seeing ourselves going back to a time when, we have this whole big man politics. We have a lot of coups happening. I was surprised. I did some research and I discovered, dozens of coups happening on the continent over the last 10 years. And I was like, I thought we stopped doing this 40 years ago. But no, apparently it's still happening. In Mali, there was a coup a couple of weeks ago. A coup. The military stormed parliament and took over. I mean, it's crazy. This is stuff that used to happen in the 60s, but it's happening today. And I think we're increasingly seeing sort of like the political space going back to a time that existed before. And this is weird, considering we're in an information age where ideally we're supposed to have enough information to not have to deal with this kind of stuff anymore. But it's still happening. We have a number of African presidents who are elderly. I mean, you're talking about guys in their late 80s, octogenarian. And these guys have been presidents for 30, 40 years. And I'm like, what happened to democracy? What happened to that happening on this continent? And you could argue that, what the West calls democracy has been tested. We all know what happened with the election, with Trump and all that stuff. So there's a sense in which there's a bit of an issue there. And I don't want to go there, it's political. But the point is that we're in a place where the continent is going back to a time that, a lot of the young people who are getting into the space where they're going to become voters very soon, are seeing a very similar political environment to people who are much older, who ideally had outlived that kind of experience. So I think what is happening is, and this is my hope, that young people will be able to look back and say, we've seen this before, we've read about this, we were taught about this in school. This is not supposed to be happening. We can do things differently, and then change the narrative. I think the opposite effect is most likely what's happening, where they're just getting disengaged, and the youth are basically not bothered anymore. They're like, it doesn't matter anyway, so what's the point? So I think we really do need to engage with young Africans to just get them to understand that the future of politics as we know it, the future of the continent, really depends on the decisions that they make now, because they're at an age where they can make decisions, where they can vote. they actually have a voice. And even if they don't vote, they have the tools, social media and other tools to be able to effect change. We've seen it happen on social media. We've seen activism that actually makes a difference on social media. You know, there are things that have been changed, policy level, policy type decisions that have been made based on activity on social media. There's a community on Twitter called Kenyans on Twitter. It's called KOT. And it's just basically a euphemism for anybody in Kenya who's on Twitter. And what happens is whenever there's an issue, if people are galvanized enough or if they're angry enough, then they raise a lot of hell on Twitter, and things change. So there's a sense in which there's a possibility to make some policy changes. It's not very coordinated. It's not very consistent. It's not very systematic or even sustainable, if you ask me, but it works. And so what can we do to use that power in a positive way and in a way that actually brings about change on the political field, possibly in a way that has never been done before. But again, we're in unprecedented times. So it calls for unprecedented approaches. So I think that's what I would say to all of this.
Yeah, I think some of what you're talking about is also true in Europe, where there's been a rise in highly nationalistic, authoritarian ideologies that people have coalesced into groups. And a lot of those are younger people, because middle-aged people, the establishment is, the people that have been in power in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, that have been a voice for unified Europe. They've been a voice for certain progressive points of view, and that is the establishment. So if you're anti-establishment, you're kind of hearkening back to something that happened before that. You're looking for something different, and it's not as easily divided as we sometimes think generational politics should be. But last question: what is a metaphor to help us understand global youth culture?
Arjun, you want to go first?
I need to think about it.
Okay, I have an idea. So I was thinking about this story. In the African culture, we tell stories a lot. So there's a story told about two guys, a man and his son, and they have a wheelbarrow that they've just acquired, and they want to take it back home, which is going to be used for work. And what they're doing is they're carrying it with them, like they're literally carrying it in their hands. And somebody passing by tells them, "Look, guys, you guys are being idiots. It's a wheelbarrow, for crying out loud, right? Let your son push the wheelbarrow. He's a younger guy. He's got more strength than you. Let him push it." So they put the thing down, and the son is pushing the wheelbarrow, and the dad is walking in front, leading him in the direction they need to go. And they come across somebody else, and the guy says, "Look, why are you letting your father, why are you letting your son do this work? You're the older one, you're stronger, you can handle this, you do the job." So they switch places, and the dad now takes the wheelbarrow, and the son now is walking behind him. And they pass somebody else, and somebody says, "Young man, you're being disrespectful to your dad. Why are you letting him do this? Right? You should put him in the wheelbarrow and you push him, because you're younger than him, you're stronger than him, so you do it." So they switch places. Dad gets into the wheelbarrow, and the son pushes him along. And they come across somebody else, and somebody else tells them, "What are you guys doing? You're going about this all wrong, right? This is a young man. You've got stronger. You're stronger than this young man. You put him in the wheelbarrow and you push it. You're the older one. You need to take care of your son." So they switch places, and the son gets in the wheelbarrow, and the dad pushes him along in the wheelbarrow. And they get to a point where somebody says, "You guys are wasting your time with all of this. I think it's faster if you just carry this thing." And so they go right back to where they started, and both of them carry this thing down the road to their home. And, it goes back and forth. But the point is that a lot of people can have an opinion about what you need to do and how you need to do it. And for youth culture, I would say, because of what the youth have experienced, and because of the perspective that they have, and the opportunity that they have ahead of them, I think they need to be bold enough to make decisions on their own. That they shouldn't be influenced by what's going on around them. That they should be able to inculcate and absorb and process information in a way that makes sense for them and make the decisions that make sense and just move with it, right? And not be swayed by everybody's opinion, because everybody has an opinion, but not everybody's opinion is valid or right. So that's what I would say.
I would also say here, like, I wouldn't be able to bring out a metaphor per se, but I'd say that as a rule of thumb, say when it comes to youth culture today, I'd say that dogma doesn't exist, or dogma at the very least is a lot less important than it was before, because things are changing so fast, and moreover, because of this widespread prevalence of information, there's no such thing as one truth or one way of doing things. And this is something that young people kind of ingrain, that's kind of ingrained in young people. And it's this greater certain openness to experiences, a greater openness to doing things in different ways. And I think that contributes to dynamism. And so youth culture itself is changing, it's dynamic, and I don't think it's bound down by particular rules. So the rule there really is that there aren't any rules.
Very good. These are excellent, Holland. I have absolutely been thrilled with this episode. This is fantastic.
Right. I've learned a lot and would keep going, but we got to go. It's really late in Kenya and Armenia right now. Mwongera, where can folks learn more about your work or connect with you, or be part of what the Papa Bear Initiative is doing? I know I'm personally interested in that. So let us know how can we be involved?
Papa Bear is an initiative on fatherhood. We equip men and work with men to become exceptional fathers. It's part of what we do. The wider project is called the Legacy Project, and it's all about families. But Papa Bear is available on social media. We're on YouTube. We have a channel, so please subscribe to our channel. We're on Facebook. We have a Facebook page. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. So you can find us there. It's Papa Bear Kenya on all those platforms. So you can look for us. In addition to that, I do research. I'm a market researcher. We do research into youth trends and consumer behavior. So you can reach out to us. We're also on social media. That's Red Brick Africa, at Red Brick Africa on Facebook and Twitter. And I'm available also on social media, so it's at Mutiga, Mutiga, across all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So please reach out. I can give you my email address as well. I have a couple of websites, redbrickafrica.com, papabear.co.ke. You can reach out and see how we can partner together. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, as you were talking there, I just subscribed to the Papa Bear Initiative on YouTube. So I look forward. Arjun, how can people connect with you?
Well, I work as the director of content right now at Flying V Group, which is one of the top 5 digital marketing agencies in the LA area. So honestly, when you're talking about connecting with me, apart from that, I write as a journalist in the tech space, and I also do a bit of writing on areas like politics and policy making, because I mean, like, those are things that are very close to me as far as, passion is concerned. And so, I mean, I would say if you have a B2B content requirement, you'd want to reach out to me at my work email, Flying V Group. But if you want to talk about technology, if you want to talk about politics, then you can just hit me up at my personal email, which is arjun.krishnalal@gmail.com. So, or you can honestly, the easiest thing to do would just be to find me on LinkedIn, because all of this is there. Yeah. So,
and how can people buy Wicked Games?
You can buy Wicked Games from Amazon, or honestly, I think most ebook retailers just have it. So if you search for Wicked Games and then my name, because there is a much more popular song named Wicked Games, so you're gonna have to search for Wicked Games, Arjun Krishna Lal. should pop up. And I think it's been on sale for a while, so it's super cheap as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's how you go about doing that. So
you can join us next week for a conversation on the hottest trends in education. Guess who picked that topic?
Well, thank you both, Mwongera and Arjun. This has been such a delightful conversation. I know you have been up late just to hang out with us at the table, but thank you so much. We want to also thank those of you who join us at the Afterword table. Again, please go to theafterwordpodcast.com. We will have these guests' links in our show notes, so you'll be able to connect with them there. And please subscribe to our podcast because it does help keep the conversation going. As always, remember, you are welcome at our table.